For educational critical review and reaction is the late, great Jordan Maxwell.
The ancient Romans had a maxim of law. Very interesting. The Romans, and I'm paraphrasing this, but the Romans had a maxim of law that said a reasonable belief is to be followed as law. A reasonable custom is to be followed as law. Meaning, if you can get enough people believing that certain things are right, and eventually over the years it becomes a custom of the people to believe a certain thing, believe something in mass, even though it's not written down in law, it should be, if it's reasonable, at least respected as law. So even though the FBI may not be, in fact, a legitimate de jure part of government, but it's been operating for so many years under the color of government that today it could be argued in court that you should follow it as a part of the law. Why? It doesn't have to be a part. It doesn't have to be in law, founded in the law, but it is accepted today, as the Romans said, anything which is reasonable that's been working for so many years, then just accept it as the law. And so that's what we are doing. We're just accepting so much today as being the United States of America law, when it's not a law. They never were founded correctly.
The FBI, the IRS, and the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, can we say that these are the political Gestapo for the Illuminati in the United States?
Well, you know what? There's a scripture in the Bible that has Jesus saying, "By their fruits you shall know them."
Yes.
And I have always used that as a measuring. By their fruits. What is the fruitage? What do these organizations ultimately bring to America? What do they ultimately bring to your human life on the earth?
Control.
And it's control. Well, then that should answer that. By their fruits you shall know them.
Now this one, Mr. Maxwell, thank you for a lifetime of hard work and courage. At the end of your interview with Bill and Carrie from Project Camelot, which gave me a slightly different slang on things, you said basically, I paraphrase, quote, that in your opinion the human race will not fare well against its present adversary, unquote. Do you have any information that you're willing to share as to the identity of this adversary? Even just a clue or two would be helpful. Please be more specific about your suspicions. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I view, there's so much to be said on that. I view the whole human race as one entity. In the first chapter of Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, the Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, there's a quote, and I think it's in the very first chapter, where he says that that politicians and the people who run the planet should view the human race as one person, because all men are men, all women are women, all children are children. So when you're dealing with the human race, just deal with it as one thing, the human race. And therefore, you can control one person, you can end up controlling the whole earth. And so go back over your question again.
Sure. Basically, he wants to know who is the adversary that you referred to.
Oh, okay. So I know that there's probably many powerful organizations in the world, but there are fraternal orders that connect all of these organizations, and they all act in orchestration. And there was a point I wanted to make about that. Oh, I remember. I view the whole human race, and I was thinking that on that interview, that the human race, in my view, is like the herds of animals out on the Serengeti plains of Africa. And they're out there by the thousands, and they're innocent. They're just doing what animals do. They're feeding their young. They're grazing. They're just living their lives. They have no idea where they are. They have no idea what they're doing. They just do what they do. And while the lions are organized, there's only a few of them. There's only a couple of lions, but they are highly organized, and they're very quiet and stealth, and they're slipping up on the herd very quietly. And that's the way I view the whole human race, as being stalked by some very vicious, animalistic humans who couldn't care less about you or your family. And so I believe that these people who are running the planet, and it's just my thinking, but I think the people who are running this planet are not human. I have always felt that. For many years I've felt that they're just not human. Which takes us into a whole new story about the extraterrestrial presence on the Earth, and if there is an extraterrestrial presence, then maybe that's what's really going on, is that we're being manipulated by far, far more powerful and divinely ordained entities who have come here from somewhere else. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Does that render us a laboratory of these entities?
Yeah. Exactly. That's precisely what it would render us, as nothing more than an experiment. In Zecharia Sitchin's work on that subject and others on that subject, I've been looking at that for many years. I believe that we are someone else's experiment. One of the first books that got me started back in 1959 on this subject, on my subjects generally, was a book called The Complete Works of Charles Fort. And in that book, Charles Fort, which you can still get today in any good bookstore, The Complete Works of Charles Fort, F-O-R-T, he said that he believed that we, as a human race, were somebody else's experiment, and whoever they are who have created us are manipulating us, playing us for fools, giving us our religions, our philosophies, our technology, and they are bringing us along according to their agenda for the human race, who we are supposed to be, and what we're supposed to accomplish for our creators. And in point of fact, if you go to the Bible in Genesis 1, it's a mistranslation, and I've sat and talked with rabbis about this subject for many years, because in Genesis 1:1 it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But that's not what it says in the original. In the original language, it says, basically, in the beginning, the Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Well, Elohim is plural, more than one. So it would be, in the beginning, the gods created the heavens and the earth. Well, who are the gods, and what are you talking about? And then when it talks about how the human race was created, Adam and Eve, it says that the gods said, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Well, who's us and our? And so when you start breaking this stuff down and finding out what the words mean, you find out that the Bible doesn't say God created man. I remember Rabbi Marvin Antelman, back in the late 60s, and I used to sit and talk for hours, and he was in Newton, Massachusetts. And I asked him about this, and he said, well, nowhere does it say that God made man, expressly that God made man. What it's actually saying in the Bible is that someone has recreated us. Adam and Eve were not the first humans on the earth. Even in the old Jewish system of theology, that was understood, because Adam and Eve represented a remaking of the creature man. And so he says, so when you read Genesis 1:28, it doesn't say God created man. It says, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Not let us make man. He's already here, but let us make man in our image. Let us intervene in his natural evolution. Let us put some of our DNA into him. And let us make man now in our image, after our likeness. And then later on it says in the Bible, now man has become as one of us, knowing good and evil. And now man is doing things like us, like we do. Even in Islam, all through the Quran, when God is talking to man, it's we. We have told you this, we have done that, we have said this, we have done, all through the Quran is we. And nobody seems to question, it never even occurred to anybody to question, what is God we? Unless, of course, you go back to the original word Elohim, which is plural, more than one. Now, on this subject, I would like to also say that when we hear that the Jews or the Hebrews were the first monotheistic religion, that is totally incorrect. Anyone who has studied history knows better than that. The Hebrews were not, and still today are not, a monotheistic religion. It's a trick. Now, here's the way the trick is played. We in Christianity thinks that they have the worship of one God, but we are told in Christianity and Judaism that they are worshipers of one God. No, it is not monotheistic. Look up the word. It's H-E-N-O. H-E-N-O.
Heno.
Henotheistic. Henotheistic. Both Christians and Jews are henotheistic, not monotheistic, which means that henotheistic means to pick one out of many. So the idea being is that there are many gods, but you picked one out of the many. And so therefore you are the worshipers of one God, but there was a whole bunch of them there. But you were the worshiper of one God. And so when Christians think of God as one almighty, divine, all-encompassing divine spirit over the whole universe, that's a misconception. That's a misconception and a misunderstanding of the words in the Bible. Actually, the Hebrews and Christians are henotheistic, meaning that they have picked one God out of many. And Yahweh was the one God out of the many gods. As a matter of fact, in our English language, when you use the word God, you can trace that back to a Latin word for God was Dios.
Dios, right.
And Dios, yes, and Dios, the Latin dictionary will tell you, comes directly from a Greek god named Zeus.
Huh.
So translating Zeus from Greek into Latin is Dios, and Dios into English is God. So when Christians and Jews are talking about God, they're talking about Zeus.
One of them, which is one of the gods.
One of the gods.
Huh.
That's one. But there are other gods.
Right.
And so, therefore, you are a worshiper of one God. Yeah, but there were 10 others you didn't worship.
What you're saying is what Zechariah Sitchin says, that the Anunnaki came here and altered our DNA. In other words, we were not created. We were here. There was a race of us. Perhaps you can call it the Neanderthals if you'd like. But they came here. They improved, if you will, our DNA, tinkered with it so that we could become Homo sapiens, who we are today. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's what I totally believe.
Okay.
Because I have heard way too many intelligent writers, authors, researchers, lecturers, and teachers around the world in both theology, philosophy, religion, and government, and they're all saying this behind the scenes, that they believe that we are nothing more than somebody else's experiment, and that when you go out and look at the stars at night, you need to understand there's life out there that's been out there a long time before this earth was ever created, and somebody owns us, and consequently somebody can control us if they own us. They're smarter than we are. We look like them. So when I hear people, just ordinary people, saying that they were abducted, and in their abductions by aliens, they were confronted by men that looked like us, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, that's possible, because the Bible says we are made in their image and likeness.
Right.
So we look like them. No. They say, well, they look like us. No.
We look like them. Right.
Correctly, because they are the ones who created you. And that's why I was in business with Zechariah Sitchin for quite a few years, and so I had an opportunity to travel with him and talk with him extensively. And there's just an awful lot of proof, not only just in the Sumerian, but all over the world. The Egyptians and the Babylonians and all the ancient peoples of the world, even including the Native Americans, have their stories about the star people who came here and created us. And another thing in relation to that subject is I don't think the moon is indigenous to our solar system.
Uh-huh.
I think
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Yeah. I'm sure that it was brought here, and I've sat and talked with scientists and physicists from NASA. I have some very close personal friends who are top-of-the-line physicists at NASA, and they're telling me off the cuff that the moon is obviously not from our solar system to start with. Second, it was probably towed here. Third, it's most likely, because of all the science around the moon, once you start studying it like they do, that the moon is hollow, and that all the planets in our solar system are probably hollow at the core. Not hollow like the hollow Earth theory, but at the core would be hollow. Because of the science and the physics of how the planets react to each other, they would have to be hollow at the core. And so the moon is most likely hollow, and it may have a metal superstructure, so that it's an artificial structure that's been towed here. And there's a lot of good reasons to think that might be true, because I've talked to Native Americans from the Lakota tribe and from the different tribes that I've been involved with, and they're telling me that in their philosophy, the Native Americans believed that there was a time when there was no moon, and that the moon was brought here by our creators. And I thought when I was hearing this, well, I've heard this before, but I heard it from NASA. And so I think there may very, very well be something to that, because the moon is an exact size that it has to be where it is. Because if it was any closer, it would crash into the Earth. If it was any further, it would drift off in its own orbit and be gone. And on a total eclipse, it's the exact perfect size to move in front of the sun for us to have a total eclipse of the sun. And I've sat with Richard Hoagland for hours in private dinners and talked with him and other scientists about why the moon is here. And come to find out, I'd never heard this, but the moon is required for human life to exist. It balances out electrically or some kind of a way our biological presence on the Earth, and that we really could not be here if it were not for the moon, because the moon does something for us humans and probably for other life forms. And so it was brought here when somebody was planning on creating us. It was brought here to enhance their experiment, because they realized, whoever it was a lot smarter than we are, and they realized that in order for human life to be able to regenerate, they're going to need some kind of an electrical balance or something in science. And so they brought us the moon. And, of course, the moon is just filled with craters. It looks like Vietnam. It looks like it's been battered by comets and meteorites. Where does all that come from? I mean, we've been here a few times on the Earth, but the moon is blown apart on all the moon. Everywhere is just nothing but craters. How did that happen in our solar system?
Dr. Brooks Agnew was with me a few days ago. We talked about this. He said that when the lunar module left the moon, it ejected their aluminum tank.
Sure, and it rung like a bell.
Like a bell. And then on Earth, there's proof out there. This is not conspiracy. When there's a large earthquake, the Earth rings like a bell. And the only way you can have that is if it's hollow.
That's right. That's my point.
So let me proceed with another question. Jordan, I've been following your work for some years now and find it very interesting and insightful. That said, I've always found your embracing of the works of Madame Blavatsky quite curious. You've stated you have all her works inside her book Isis Unveiled Part 2 and her best and your favorite. And indeed, some of your work seems to correlate with her teachings of theosophy. My question is, how much of her teachings influence your work? And would you consider yourself a follower of theosophy as she describes it? Thank you.
Okay. Good question. I'm being very honest with you and upfront with you. Her work has probably not influenced me at all. I would say, if anything, about 1%. But I have always appreciated people who do deep study on subjects. Manly Palmer Hall was one of my dearest friends, a brilliant man, intellectually astute and brilliant man on philosophies of the world, religions of the world. He had no particular creed that he was pushing, but an extraordinarily brilliant man writing and speaking on subjects which all the human race should be aware of. So when I came across the work of Helena Blavatsky, she was not the only one. At the same time, I was reading and equally as influenced by the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, and the Upanishads, and the Rig Veda. At the same time, I was fascinated with the works of other German philosophers, French philosophers, Masonic philosophers, which I have enormous amounts of material on the Masonic philosophies around the globe. And so at that particular time when I mentioned that, I was thinking something in relation to maybe the question that was asked, and I was thinking of something she said, and I appreciated all of her work. I do not consider her to be a fool or demonic or evil. She was a woman, a very interesting woman who traveled the world and had something that unfortunately we don't have anymore, and that was an open mind and intellectually honest to read and study and question everything around her. And I admire that in anyone who has an open mind and reads and studies and questions great, and trying to get to the great truths of the universe. I have an admiration for, and I read their work. It doesn't mean I believe everything they've found out or whatever it is they believe, but it certainly helps when you have people like Blavatsky and the great philosophers from Plato and Aristotle. I've read many of these, and it just helps me to keep my mind open. But in point of fact, with your question, I would say she has influenced me probably less than 1%. It's just that I happened to use her as an example once. If anyone's really influenced me, I would say mainly Palmer Hall, because I believe, I've only been looking at this kind of information for 48 years, and my detractors haven't looked at it for 48 minutes.
Right.
But I believe that Manly Palmer Hall was one of the most incredible humans that ever walked the earth in any age ever. And when you read his, 68 books and hundreds of lectures, written lectures, plus the thousands and thousands of hours of lectures on every subject that the human mind could come up with. And he never once promoted any particular belief system, never had his own personal view on anything. But if you listen to the man and have an open mind and are intellectually honest, you have to agree this is a phenomenally brilliant and fascinating man who had mastered all of the occult sciences, all of the religions of the world, all the philosophies of the world, and was merely trying to explain to we humans, we people, how these things work, what is Buddhism, what is Hinduism, where did this Shinto religion come from, what is Christianity, where does the Bible come from? That's all he did, was explain all the ancient mysteries of the world and where these things came from, and then would advise you to go out and study whatever it is that happens to interest you. Well, when I find people saying that someone like that is worshiping the devil, I know for a fact that this is ludicrous, because the very word devil is simply putting a D in front of the word evil, or taking an O out of the word good, and it becomes God, because the same root word for God is the same root word for good. So take an O out of good, it becomes God, because God is good, and put a D in front of the word evil, and it becomes devil. It's a use of words and terms, and people who are highly educated and intellectually astute know that you cannot brush with a wide brush and say that somebody is worshiping the devil because he's smarter than you are, because he's far more educated and intellectually enlightened than you are, and therefore the only way to handle his brilliance is to call him a worker of the devil, and now you feel much better about it because you don't have to think anymore. No, I know people all over the world who call themselves religious, who cannot hold a candle to the intellectual esteem of some great writers and researchers. And so I have the highest of respect for people who do their homework. I learn from people like Manly people, as for one. There are many, many good people on the earth who have educated the human family. That's what I want to do.
And I think it's very important to express the fact and to emphasize that just because we study people that we may not agree with does not mean that, folks, we have to be exposed to every perspective in order to know what the other side is thinking.
Well, of course.
So now, another question. Does the quote-unquote Hawk Ring Society have any connection to the early banking merchants of Venice in the 16th century to modern day? Furthermore, does the society have a historical connection to all the military institutions today?
The name of that society was the Hawk Ring?
Hawk Ring Society, yes.
You know what? I've never heard of that. I'll have to do some research on that. I know that whole black nobility coming out of Venice is a very, very powerful story about how Europe was being manipulated by those merchant bankers. I remember when I was a kid, my family used to have blinds on the window. They were called Venetian blinds.
Yes.
And the implication is but one flip of the wrist, and you cut off all light into the room. And so you are now covering yourself with a Venetian blind. So yeah, I know Venice has been very important, and when you're talking Venice, you're talking Italy, and ultimately you're talking the papacy, you're talking about the divine right of kings, the financing of the Vatican, and ultimately today, the financing and manipulation of world finance throughout Europe. And whoever controls Europe has dominated, well, let me go back and say this, that for 2,700 years, Rome, under the Caesars in the beginning, Rome has dominated Europe. And so today, when we have kings and rulers and princes and officials who rule Europe by divine right, and the Queen of England rules by divine right, and all the different kings and princes, what are you talking about? Define your terms when you say the King of England rules by divine right. What are you talking about? First of all, the very word divine, which we today think about in relation to God, actually goes back to the grapes and the chalice and the Holy Grail, because the Holy Grail was the cup of Christ. And what do you have cups for if it isn't to put liquid in? So in the ancient world, a grail was a cup, and you pour into the cup wine. And so when the Catholic Church has a celebration at their Mass where the drinking of the wine and the eating of the flesh of the God. And so when you're drinking of the wine comes from grapes. Where do grapes come from? They come from divine. And that's where we get the word divine, because that's where the grapes come from, is from the divine, from divine. So, so my feeling is, rather than condemn someone for something you think that they're worshiping the devil, no, they may be intellectually superior to you in that they have an open mind and have studied, and universities, read books, traveled, and intellectually understand that there's a far, far bigger story when it comes to religion, theology, God, and the world than how does Shakespeare say it? There are many more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Right.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I've been around the world many times, and I have seen things with my own eyes and experienced things in my life and had knowledge given to me that absolutely blows my mind. how much people don't know. And that's been my big crusade. And I go out in public and say, I'm not the world's foremost authority on anything, but I want to bring to my fellow man a whole new renaissance of thinking, an intellectually freedom to think and to question, to research. Because if you go back into history and look at the what happened to Europe under the divine right of kings, you will find that the Vatican was killing hundreds of thousands of people, murdering people, cutting their heads off, pouring lead into the face of children while their parents watched, to break the back of the human race, to cause people to get on their knees and crawl to the emperors of Europe. And then there was the Counter-Reformation with the Jesuits who came in and murdered people everywhere. We've got stories coming out of Central and South America, Mexico, of what the Spanish did to the indigenous people of South America. Well, they were doing that in Europe for 1,000 years. So Rome has dominated Europe for 2,700 years, first under the Caesars, and then with the coming of the last 1,680 years under the Vatican. And so therefore any king, ruler, or prince who would proclaim himself ruling by divine right is doing it at the behest of the Pope. He's the one that represents God, which is simply dog spelled backwards. That's why you have church dogma. People need to awaken to the fact that the whole world is run by people who are far superior and far more demonic and depraved than you have ever suspected, and they're playing you for a fool by using words and terms and symbols and catchphrases, and they have built up banks, institutions of higher learning, educational systems, governmental systems. All of this whole Western civilization is a sham. It's been developed by secret societies, fraternal orders. I was talking about this stuff back in 1960. I was giving lectures in downtown Los Angeles in '63 when Kennedy was assassinated. I was on my way downtown to give a lecture on secret societies in the church, and when John Kennedy was assassinated. So if there's one subject I know, and that is how world governments, banks, churches, institutions, how the entire superstructure of Western civilization is a construct that was put together a long time ago by very powerful and wealthy people, and we were born into this system, and so many of us just bought into it and have no idea in the world. And again, I would caution everyone that your decisions in life are only as good as your information. And if you haven't done your homework and figured out who's running this planet and who prints your money and how this government really operates and how your church or your synagogue really operates and where these words and terms that are used in government and finance and commerce and churches and religion, where all this stuff came from, then you better go back before you condemn anybody and start waking up and doing some reading and studying and educate yourself so that you don't sound like a fool when you're talking before intelligent people. Know what you're talking about. The Bible is filled with admonitions of be able to represent your faith intelligently, be able to explain what it is you believe, and be able to do it with intelligence, so that wise and intelligent people will show respect for your faith and for your God if you sound like you might halfway be educated. So that's why, as much as I abhor the church today on the earth, I abhor the church. I abhor everything it stands for. But I have the highest of respect and admiration for the Bible and for the concept of God, for the idea that there is a higher divine presence in the universe, so to speak. Of that I have no problem with. I have the highest of admiration for whoever it is that has created the universe, created us. And so I don't have any problem with the idea of God and theology, but I abhor what we call today the church. It is a monstrosity. All you have to do is, if you've got any intelligence at all, if you have any self-respect at all, turn on TBN and watch people spitting on themselves and falling on the stage, and you will see thousands and thousands of people paying $50 to $100 for a seat to watch a show. I mean, that's what the word, look at, God comes, our word God comes from a Greek word theo. Theo or T-H-E or T-H-E-O. Theo in Greek was God. So the study of God is called theology. And that's where we get our word theater, comes from theo or theology, theater. So in the ancient Greek world, they had what they called the Greeks called the God show. You go in, sit down in the pew, and pay money and watch the God show, the theater. So today, that's what religion is. It's a theater. It's a show. You go and sit down, pay money, and watch the show, and it looks very, very holy and reverent and makes you feel good all over. And you come out equally as ignorant as when you went in. And 48 years later, you're still going to the same God show and cannot answer a question intelligently. You've done no research. You can't read. You've never thought about anything. You can't answer any question concerning your faith. And so when someone who has spent 48 years, not in your church, but in studying theology, religion, philosophy, commerce, world government, is confronting you with questions, you immediately call that person demonic and depraved, and he must be working for the devil.
And we
have to take a quick break.